The new home of Big Ten college football has selected the Hawkeyes on the road. We will discuss here for the next 60 minutes right here at the Voice of College Football. We enjoy your comments and questions, of course. Consider contributing to the channel here and in a number of ways. Hit the like button. And again, consider the financial contribution right here at the Voice of College Football. We talk Hawkeyes here each and every Tuesday. It's a 93rd edition with Corey Bretta from the Hawkeye of the Storm, and Corey is a perfect 93 for 93. Without him, we don't go with this show each and every Tuesday. So, Corey, we always appreciate you being here. Always enjoy the conversation. And how you doing this week?
I'm doing good. Yesterday's announcement about the whiteout game kind of got my juices pumping, and I said on my segment that I published on my channel yesterday, it finally feels to me like we're counting down the days. That's kind of it's usually around early June, maybe late May that I start feeling that. And so maybe it came a little bit early. I know some people start feeling that in spring. I just don't. But to get that announcement, to know that Iowa is going to be on CBS, it's going to be special. I'm excited about the new TV contract. I know, most fans of the Big Ten Conference, I think, are excited about being able to be on different networks, I think. I mean, do you hear anybody crying about not being able to be on ABC and ESPN anymore? I mean, I like Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler, but, it's kind of cool to be doing something new. I know it's benefiting the conference and benefiting the institutions financially.
Us old-timers remember when the Big Ten was on CBS.
Yeah.
That was a long, long time ago. I believe the last year was 1986. So I look forward to that as well. And I understand I may be a bit of an outlier working in the TV industry for as long as I did, because some people do enjoy the production and the various announcing teams, and they add that on to the enjoyment of the game itself, and kind of comparing the network productions and the style and the approaches to the game production. Certainly, I was working on these games for a long, long time. So yeah, I think I tend to think less about that the more I'm separated from it, but it's certainly still something I evaluate as I watch these games.
Is Mike Tirico going to be calling Big Ten games for NBC?
I don't know. I know that people have brought that up, asking that. I've seen that both to me directly and on social media. I don't know.
Okay, because I didn't know if they were kind of making him the voice of Notre Dame football or what. Obviously, there's a radio voice of Notre Dame football, but yeah, the CBS jingle is enough to get me kind of pumped for it. So here's where I'm disconnected with things. I called into your Big Ten show yesterday. It was actually a little after you got off, and so I was talking with your guy John.
You were avoiding me.
Basically. No, I tried to call in earlier, and you had somebody on, then I had to get off, and I came back, and you were already done. But the reason I bring that up is I didn't even know Dylan Raiola had committed to Georgia. I mean, John had to tell me that. I just, sometimes I'm just so honed in on what's happening here, I miss some national stories. But in addition to the announcement yesterday that Penn State's whiteout would be against Iowa, and it'd be a 7 p.m. game, 7 p.m. Central game on CBS, were there other CBS announcements yesterday? Was that the only one? Are they announcing these in segments?
I saw other footnotes on social media that were connected to other games, but I did not see an announcement. I did not see a list of games. I need to dig out that myself.
Okay.
But I don't know.
The reason I ask is because, first of all, I'm going to be very curious to see how things are set up, primarily because this is going to be an odd year in general. I don't need this. We don't need to make this next hour all about, Big Ten television, but I do think it's going to be very unique with the SEC still having a bit of a hold on what CBS can do, or vice versa, I guess. CBS is obviously going to be working the Big Ten into things. We see that with September 23rd with the Penn State game. But I'll just be interested to see exactly how it's constructed week to week. And maybe that information's out there and I just don't have it in front of me. But do you know what I'm getting at, Mark? Just
constructed
from week to week,
in terms of
how many
time slots for the various networks and what teams are selected.
Moving forward after this year, the SEC is going to be on ESPN networks. We get that. But this year, you've got the Big Ten on CBS,
this
and you've got
season, yes.
yeah, you've got the Big Ten on CBS, and you've got the SEC on CBS. So I'm just going to be interested to see, does the Big Ten just have all the prime nighttime slots, or will that rotate? How is that determined? Do they just see? You probably have the answer is probably out there.
Yeah. So the current CBS SEC contract calls for, if you look at the scope of the games, the landscape of the games across CBS for the entire season, it's 3:30, 3:30, 3:30 Eastern time every week, an SEC game. They only had one noon outside of Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, those types of, but on a Saturday, they only had one noon SEC game where they did a doubleheader SEC, and they only had one primetime SEC game, Alabama, Texas A&M. So there was a time when they used to do two primetime games, and they would obviously be the larger games, bigger games, matchups of the season. But that's been pared down to one game in the last few years, and CBS selected Alabama, Texas A&M last season. But so that has been a strictly 3:30 Eastern time slot for the CBS SEC game.
So does that mean that there'll just be more total football games on CBS this year?
Well, I've got to think that since this Big Ten contract is overlapping the existing SEC contract, that unless there's a lot of variation and flexibility in that existing SEC contract, that CBS would have to finish out its run with the SEC in this 3:30 time window and kind of work the Big Ten around that.
Yeah, it's just, and I'm sure it's right. All of this is probably laid out with a fine point pin, right, in these contracts. But like, it's just cool. It's cool and it's interesting and intriguing that Penn State has a game at night on NBC week 1, and they have a game at night on CBS in week 4. I find that fascinating.
It's brilliant by the Big Ten.
It is.
It's brilliant.
It is. You're absolutely right.
As soon as this came together, I said, bingo. I didn't think of it. It's unlike the other scheduling component that we will get to here in a second, because I'd like to bring it up. But this, I can't take any credit for ever thinking of this, but it's an NFL model, and you are forcing all of those TV entities to promote your network or your conference all day on Saturday and throughout the week.
Yeah. And so my question then is, when there's a primetime 7 p.m. game on NBC, will there also be a primetime Big Ten game on NBC? Or excuse me, if there's a primetime game on NBC, will there also be one on CBS or on the Big Ten Network? I'm assuming there could be, or on Fox. I'm assuming not. I mean, that.
Well, there's going to be overlapping games on the Big Ten Network. That's already exists now
on the Big Ten Network, but on the three major platforms, I'm just wondering, how often will you have overlapping primetime games?
I think they try to avoid it, but they overlap. Okay, primetime. As soon as you said the word primetime, that's a bit different, because the Big Ten skews heavily toward the day compared to the other conferences. At least they have in the past.
That might be ending. I wonder if that's ending now.
Well, it's going to end to a certain extent, or not end to a certain extent, but be leaning that direction at night, just simply by adding 2 West Coast teams that will never play at noon Eastern time. And therefore, they're going to take up those late time slots.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was thinking too when you talked about the SEC. The one of 2 7 p.m. games last season was Alabama, Texas A&M. I'm guessing that was a home game for A&M.
No.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm just thinking SEC, so you're going to have Eastern time zone schools, and I'm assuming Alabama is that Eastern time zone?
No.
That's Central time zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's close. It's very close.
But my point is that makes sense. You got 2 teams in the Central time zone to an extent, right? Whereas opposed, if you're not going to probably schedule Florida and South Carolina at 7 p.m. I'm not saying that's a rule. You know better than I would as far as network scheduling, but you got a couple teams that are starting at 8 p.m. local time. That might be something you would try to avoid and try to bump them up to an afternoon slot.
Why would South Carolina and Florida, for example, not play at 7 Eastern?
They're Eastern time zone schools.
Yeah.
So that means they start at 8. They would have to start at, they're starting at that 8 p.m. Eastern slot. They're actually starting at 8 p.m. local time, whereas if you're Alabama, Texas A&M, they're starting at 7 p.m. local time.
Okay, I think we got our semantics confused there.
Am I wrong on that?
Correct me if I'm wrong. You stated that it would be unlikely that South Carolina, Florida, as an example, as 2 Eastern time zone schools would play a 7 Eastern time game.
No, it's an 8 p.m. Eastern game.
Okay.
I
still don't think so, but
yeah, you can if you can manipulate that prime time slot, from 7 Eastern to 8 Eastern, depending on where the schools are. I mean, you have unlimited flexibility. But assuming you have a 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern time slot, I would think you would avoid as much as possible scheduling East Coast schools. I guess that's what I'm saying. And so I just wonder if, CBS has other obligations, but I just wonder where, their scheduling practice shifts to moving forward. This is going to be a particularly intriguing year. And, I haven't, the reason I asked you about other announcements is I'm curious as we get more and more announcements, what this will look like from week to week, because we've just never ever experienced anything like, we've had the Big Ten. We've been able to see games at times on ABC at night, and that's overlapped some games. I'm not saying the same night, but that's overlapped seasons in which there are Big Ten games at 7 p.m. Central Time on Fox. But we've never had a year where there are 3 major networks that possibly are rotating primetime Big Ten games in addition to the Big Ten network. So that is a fascinating thing. And you're going to have, I would expect, if it's not Mike Tirico, it's going to be whoever's next in line. You're going to get the big names. You're talking about Gus Johnson for Fox. You're talking about, what is it, Danielson or whoever it is for CBS, possibly Tirico. You're going to get the big names for those primetime games, regardless of network.
Yeah, it's a great maneuver for a number of reasons. The one that I was pointing toward a few minutes ago is that the SEC, for example, going forward, all ABC, all ESPN networks. So CBS is certainly going to mention the scores and show the highlights at halftime, but they will not be promoting, of course, other networks' games. Well, CBS is going to have to talk about the games on NBC and Fox that are Big Ten games because the conferences force this. This was not a thing back in the day where these networks would not mention any other games on any other networks.
Yeah.
And it became obvious at some point. I think the NFL pushed it to say, no, you're going to promote our games regardless of where they are. And college football and basketball have followed right in suit.
And the NBA has done that now too. You've got ESPN, promoting TNT and NBA TV games and vice versa. So that makes sense. So now I understand fully what you were saying. So yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating. And the Penn State storyline too. You're playing, both those games are at home, right? The West Virginia game is in State College.
Yes.
So Drew Aller and that new look Nittany Lions squad will have. It's not like that game on the 23rd is going to be his first time out under the lights at Beaver Stadium. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they play against a West Virginia team that doesn't have a whole lot of expectations. Is that fair? I mean, if you were to ask your guy Wolfman, he may tell you differently, but based on what I know and what I've heard you say, I don't think they're not. That should be an easy win for Penn State. Should be at home.
I don't think that he would actually tell us differently, but I get your point. Yes, they may be the worst team in the Big 12. We will find out. Of course, we've got 4 newcomers to the Big 12 from the group of 5, so they've got a bit of a mountain to climb in regards to playing that kind of competition weekly.
And Penn State's got a chance to be the best team in the Big 10. I'm not saying they're going to be better than Ohio State or Michigan, but they're projected as a top 10, maybe a top 5 team.
So I very rarely, I've probably done this 3 times, 4 or 5 times ever, clipped anything off and posted it on Twitter. But this was related to the other scheduling component that came out this week. And this is going to be discussed over the next several weeks or months and determined, but it's nice to have something to go on and this was posted by The Athletic the other day, that there are 3 scheduling models that the Big Ten is looking at. One would be that they would protect 2 rivalries and split the rest of the conference into 6 and 7 team groupings to alternate each season. The other model was 3 protected games and then splitting a 5 and 5. Is that what it is? 6 and 6. 6 and 6. And then the other model, Corey, this hit me hard. This really hit me hard here. So
I'm seeing double here.
it wasn't that hard to do.
Oh.
You finally figured it out in 2024. Finally. Is somebody in the Big Ten office watching our show? And then they came up with this proposal and everybody's patting them on the back. Finally. Okay. This format allows schedule makers the most flexibility. Ha! For anybody out there that watched the video that I just produced here in the last day or two about Big Ten scheduling, bingo! And I've produced the same video like a year ago, bingo, and about 5 years ago, and about 10 years ago. Schedule makers with the most flexibility in terms of competitive balance, home and away rotations, and the specific challenges around West Coast travel for teams playing USC and UCLA. Oh, my word. Finally. Okay. Okay.
So explain this to that was a lot, but explain this to me in layman's terms. So I understand competitive balance and the idea of being able to be flexible. Are we talking year-to-year scheduling? Is that what you're?
Yes. So I have been proposing this, as I mentioned there. I think you may have caught it for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the core of my debate starts with that not every school has the same number of rivals. So why just have rivals as placeholders? It's just schedule and protect the games that count as rivalries, and then it provides more scheduling flexibility throughout the rest of the schedule.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, why are we putting a line in the sand about number of protected? I mean, if you have a limit, I mean, a team can't have 5 protected rivalries, but I think get what you're saying. Yeah.
Northwestern.
And the other part of this you've talked about in the past is what the NFL has been able to do promotion-wise, being able to promote the release of your schedule, and it's great for the brand. So that's something that the Big Ten should consider on a year-to-year basis. I don't know why does any of this need to be scheduled eons in advance?
Oh, it doesn't. Unfortunately, even if a conference, let's say the Big Ten, determines to do that, they can't do that alone because they have to schedule the non-conference games with the cooperation of the other conferences and continue to schedule them 10 years in advance.
What does that got to do with anything?
Because then you can't have a schedule release if people already know that you're going to be playing X number of games against these opponents. If Iowa's a bad example because, of course, they always play Iowa State. But in terms of, Ohio State and Alabama agree to a contract, a series home and home in 28-29, then we already know that. So it's not a surprise to college football fans when they see the schedule release.
I'm talking about Big Ten scheduling.
Yeah, you're talking about the actual conference schedule.
Yes. So what if 3 games? I mean, I don't like the idea of having non-conference schedules made 5 or 6 years in advance, but I'm also not in favor of knowing Big Ten schedules however many years in advance. I mean, I don't know why you couldn't just announce Big Ten. Are you basing this on the Big Ten trying? The Big Ten is not going to formulate schedules based upon a program's non-conference schedule to position them for playoff potential. That's not what you're talking about.
No, I am talking about there's no reason to schedule games 13 years in advance.
Right.
Number one.
I agree.
There are professional leagues that do it during the offseason each and every year. Number one. Number two, I would like to see a committee with a formula, not just haphazardly a committee determine games, but they would work within a very strict criteria of scheduling these non-conference games to create an equitable schedule out of conference for every team in the Power Five.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then from a promotional standpoint, as you led off the conversation, you could have a schedule unveiling and really hype up the sport and create a certain day on the calendar where there's a schedule release a la the NFL. It basically makes a national holiday out of it.
Well, I can tell you one AD that would probably be against that. I'll let you guess where he's employed at, because the idea of positively promoting your program is not in his repertoire. All right, so, but anyways, I think it's a good idea, and I would not be. So when are we going to know this? When are we going to get word on scheduling for 24 and beyond? Do we have any idea when this is going to happen officially?
Based on that article in The Athletic, we don't know, but the Big Ten has been working on this, and at least they have made it public that they have 3 models that they've narrowed their 40 models down to.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is based on the information we have for this year, I'm excited to be able to get, have these Big Ten schools on other major networks, and we better get used to it because this is the reality. Now, I did see somebody in the chat brought up, Big Noon is still king, right? Is that fair? Because they're even, am I right in saying they're changing it to B1G Noon? Or was that just a joke I saw somewhere? Are they going to be they're going to be switching it to the Big Ten Big Noon logo? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Somebody said that.
I did not see that.
Okay.
That sounds like a joke. I don't know.
Joke. But that still will take precedent, right? Fox still holds primary scheduling power?
I don't know.
Yeah, because we'd moved away from prime. I mean, think about how many games last year for an Iowa team that had no offense. How many times did Iowa get scheduled for late day games? Quite a few times. I mean, I remember Iowa Rutgers at night, Iowa Illinois at night. These games are being put on Fox Sports 1. Now you've got the Big Ten Network, you got Fox Sports 1, you got Fox, you got CBS, you've got NBC, you've got CBS. The other thing I was going to ask you, Mark, is, and then we can get off this topic because I'm sure people are starting to get bored with it, but is there a chance, based on what you know, I know Peacock's going to be a part of the plan as well, but with CBS still having obligations to the SEC this year and with obligation to the Big Ten, do you believe that either A, there's just going to be a few more games on the Fox networks, on the NBC networks, etc., which include Peacock, or do you think CBS will end up having a game or two Big Ten games on CBS Sports Network? Is that a possibility?
I don't think there's too much inventory. Now, of course, we do have 2 additional teams, and we do have 16 teams playing non-conference games before they consolidate and start playing each other. But when you think about it, I guess there were a couple weeks early in the season and have been year to year where the Big Ten Network would actually regionalize games and have 2 or 3 Big Ten games on at the same time and regionalize them. So there must be that much inventory. I would have to do the math in trying to determine how many time slots. Well, I guess 16.
Well, and again, I'm not even talking, but I'm not talking about Nick. I'm talking about this year.
Yes.
So, as it relates to scheduling this year, you've got 14 teams, right? Non-conference wise. So next year, I would expect things to clear up. I mean, I would think that the contract is built in a way that accommodates all of that. I'm just thinking this year with it kind of being crowded with the SEC's contract, et cetera, and the fact that we know there aren't going to be Big Ten games on ESPN or ABC, that there is going to be an overhaul or whatever
an overflow
of inventory.
Sure. Well, Fox, between Fox and FS1, they basically have 5 time slots. You have a
Yeah.
noon, you've got a 4, and you've got a prime time, but Fox never shows a prime time, hardly ever shows a primetime Big Ten game.
Just regular Fox.
Yes.
Yeah.
FS1 does.
Yeah.
So
FS1
anyway, there's
does.
about 5 slots there. And then there's just one on CBS, one on NBC.
And Fox in the past has had Big 12 games late at times on
Yes,
Big
sure.
12 or Pac-12.
Yeah. So it sounds like with the absence of ABC and ESPN, ESPN2, etc., that there is going to be overflow. Because that's a lot of windows that have been taken away from the Big Ten.
Yeah, exactly.
With the other networks only taking up one slot.
Yeah, so I'll be fascinated to see how it all plays out. Mark, your thoughts? I mean, I kind of weighed on this on my channel yesterday. Whiteout at Happy Valley. I think anybody with a pulse who understands college football realizes that is an advantage for Penn State. I mean, it's one of the greatest night atmospheres. I think Kinnick. I haven't been to a whiteout. I haven't been to Baton Rouge, but based on everything I know and people who have, it's one of the greatest atmospheres out there. I think Kinnick is also one of the greatest atmospheres out there, but there's no question about it. This does not help Iowa's chances of winning. I think that's fair. Like if it's a big noon game, I'd give Iowa a better chance early in the day. I know that narrative doesn't always work, doesn't always fit, but just your thoughts on how this affects the spread.
Oh, how it affects the spread? I have no idea. Now, how it affects Iowa's chances of winning? Now, to me, I completely agree with everything that you just said, and most people's assumption that it's more difficult to play especially in a difficult setting, some of the ones that you mentioned and others at night. That makes sense. We know that just there's more buzz in the stadium. It's a more hostile setting. And when I say buzz, you can take that a number of ways.
Yeah, he's going to say part of it is the consumption of alcohol prior. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
However, you know what I say? This is a similar argument that I take up when people bring up like trap games and things like that. Give me evidence. Like there's no statistic to back that up. It's
no
just
statistic to back what up?
That it's more difficult to play a night game on the road than it is a day game. Nobody's ever proven this. It's just a theory.
I'll prove it to you as it relates to Kinnick. You go look at the number of top 5 to top 10 teams that have lost at night at Kinnick, and then compare it to some of the losses they've had during the day at home. And they've had some losses at home under the lights. 2012 Penn State was an example. That was a bad Iowa team that went 4-8, but
2018 or 19 Penn State.
2019.
I don't know when that game was played.
2019 was a night game. You're right, on ABC. And that was the year that they had so many issues on the interior of that line. Who was that dude that ended up getting drafted by the Ravens that just was destroying the interior of Iowa's line? I mean, Robert Windsor. Man, I can't believe I thought of that name. Robert Windsor. Just destroying Iowa's guards. And, I had Nate Stanley at quarterback and Tyler Goodson at running back. But, boy, that was so there's exceptions to the rule. But 2016 against Michigan.
You're cherry picking games. You would have to give me a full analysis of Iowa's day games and night games to
2008 against Penn State. Home. Daniel Murray kicks. It was an undefeated Penn State game. Ripped him out of the national championship conversation. 2010 against Penn State. Sean Prater gets a pick 6. They upset Penn State again.
This is not proving anything to me.
It is proving. It's proving a lot of things, Mark. 2016. 2016, they go on the road to Happy Valley. The very next week, they come back after getting killed by the Lions. They come back, beat the Wolverines. That was a really good Michigan team. 2017, Ohio State was, I will say this, Ohio State started, I believe, in the afternoon, ended up in the lights, under the lights. So I'll give you that.
What are we?
2000.
Is that half?
No.
Half and half, or how do we judge that one?
Okay, well, I can go grab the data, but I'm saying when Iowa's played top 10 teams, 2017 is another example. Iowa, Penn State under the lights. Now, Iowa lost that game, Mark. They did lose that game, but you remember how they lost that game.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about Kinnick at night that is unique. The fans are right on top of you. They stripe the stadium. I know everybody loves a whiteout, but there's something special about that.
Well, you changed it from a number of difficult venues in college football down to Kinnick.
No, I'm just simply saying I can't give you data across the country, but
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's not been proven to me.
But I'm saying I'm going to prove it to you regarding Iowa.
I know about 8 straight times Ohio State went into Happy Valley for a whiteout and kicked their rear ends.
Yeah, that could. Well, that's first of all, you're giving me anecdotal evidence because you're picking.
Yeah, I'm doing
one of the biggest blue bloods in college football and saying, "Oh, Ohio State's done this and that." Well, Ohio State does that anywhere, anytime. But if you look at a team like Iowa, this is a 7 to 9 win team year after year. You wouldn't expect them to be as consistently competitive against top 10 teams year in and year out under the lights at home.
Well, I would need those numbers versus when they've played top 10 teams at home during the day.
Okay. I'll get you that. I'll find that information for you, Mark. Here's what's brilliant.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I've never seen anybody lay out statistically, this is how teams perform during the day. This is how they perform at night on the road in these difficult venues. And then I would say, you know what? There you go. Trap games. It's the same thing. That's a trap game. This is a trap game. Teams
I don't think it's the same.
Don't perform well into trap games. And I always say the same thing. I'm not arguing that there's not such a thing as a trap game. I understand the concept of a trap game, but it can't be proven to me. It could be if somebody would ever do the work that there are trap games. And if they can define what a trap game is, then they would have to lay out the numbers to show me that that is truly a thing. Just like I have NFL friends that say division games are tougher. Okay. What proves that? I, again, have never seen this proven that it's more difficult to play in division than outside the division.
I don't have neither one of us has the data in front of us. So I'll be happy to scrounge up the data and I'm not speaking for the country. I'm talking about Iowa specifically. And during the last 15 years, my guess is that I can find data that you will find very interesting. And if you compare that data, Mark, say you were to weigh that data versus your typical 8 to 9 win program and their performances against top 10 teams, regardless of location.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a alarming trend. I'm not saying that they may be 500, they may be a little below 500, they may be a little above 500. But think about what that means. A 7 to 9 win Iowa team above 500 at home at night against top 10 teams in the that's really hard to do. I mean, so we'll see. I gotta actually do the research. So put this to rest.
I look forward to that. All right. We also have some news coming out of the NIL world concerning the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Now, you were talking about the late kicks and why that sometimes plays to the advantage of the home team because of alcohol consumption. But I'll just pull it up here. And we talked with Brad Heinrichs, leader of the Swarm, here a couple of weeks ago on the show and discussed kind of some of the initiatives and the plans moving forward for that collective. So they announced today the partnership with Des Moines-based Exile Brewing Company. And so Exile will now have a custom Swarm Golden Ale with 20% of profits going directly to the Iowa Swarm. So you think about that, okay, 20% of profits. I think that's still pretty substantial. I mean, think about volume-wise. I mean, we'll see how big of a hit this drink is, but that's an easy way for people who are tailgating and for Iowa fans across the Midwest to support the Swarm without being a member of the Swarm. I'm assuming, and I haven't talked to Brad since this announcement went final. We talked again a little bit about it a couple of weeks ago. but this is going to be available in a lot of stores. It's not just a matter of, well, it's going to be available to members. No, this is an initiative that's another way of creating revenue for the collective, and revenue that's not being held down by big money donors. In other words, I can tell you for a certainty, there are certain big money people that give a lot of money to the NIL initiative at Iowa, but because they're giving the amounts that they're giving, they're able to say, "Hey, this is what this is for." All right, and Brad has talked about that as well. The problem with that is it may benefit Kirk Ferentz, but it probably is not going to benefit Lisa Bluter, and I don't think it's really benefiting Fran McCaffrey. So my point is, if you can figure out a way, I mean, you'd love for Fran and Lisa to win over those big money people, and I'm sure they have to some extent, some of the people out there, but I can tell you it's not to the extent that Kirk Ferentz has, and Kirk has been here for 20-some years. I get that. But this is another example of generating revenue for the Swarm Collective as a whole, and that should help all three sports, not just football.
I have no response on this one.
What is that?
Collective. I don't know. I was clicking on something just to continue the conversation. Dave says both wins were versus Ohio State, kind of like Penn State now. Yeah, I was attempting to click somewhere else, and then it jumped on me. So I don't even know what that means.
I don't.
There we go. We'll go with Dave. Says Penn State's 2-5 against Ohio. Oh, versus the top 10 in whiteouts.
Again, I'm not doubting that at all. That's good for them, and I'm happy for them. That's fantastic. So maybe their whiteout is not as intimidating as it's made out to be.
They're 10-8 according to Dave in whiteouts.
That's Dave. That's a bad record. If you're really looking at it as a whole, that's not against top 10. It's a whole.
You'd have to look at each game. No, I know a lot of those are Ohio State games. A lot of them.
Okay, sure, that's fair.
But I don't know. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying we would have to look at those.
Was that last
games.
year they played Auburn?
They played Minnesota. I thought last year was, the 2 years ago was Auburn.
It was Auburn, okay.
They beat Auburn. They beat Minnesota last year. Minnesota in a whiteout.
Yeah.
A good team, a decent team.
But the 2-5 record versus top 10 teams, how many of those are Ohio State? That's a fair question. But top 10 is top 10 to an extent.
And how good were those Penn State teams? A lot of them were in the top 10 themselves.
That's my point. So if they're 2-5 against that, it's not a very good record in my book, not for a Penn State program that's winning 10, 11 games a year.
I wonder what Iowa's record is in the Big Ten and what their place in the Big Ten is in winning percentage over the course of the years that you're going to look up. I'd be curious to know that.
What's it?
Like what would their winning percentage be in the Big Ten in regards to would they be fourth in the Big Ten, fifth in the Big Ten? I'm guessing somewhere of those two spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my guess is, I could be wrong on this. My guess is, Mark, I know you love speculation. My guess is that besides maybe Ohio State, besides maybe Ohio State, if Penn State's 2-5 against top 10, and Iowa hasn't played Ohio State at night a lot, believe me, because if they did, they probably would have more losses. Is that fair? They're in opposite divisions. That's part of it. I will say the one time that I remember, 2006, was it the 2006 College Game Day game? There was all that hype, and Ohio State went in there and creamed them pretty good. So, not to say that and like I say, 2012 against Penn State. I remember that game. I know where I was 11 years ago watching that game, and I think Iowa lost Brandon Sheriff and Andrew Denal in the same game, and that season just went down the drain as quickly as the game got started. 4-8 year. But I'm just trying to think, besides those 2 years, it just seems like every year you have, and the other thing is, Mark, there are games just like what you're talking about with Penn State and scheduling Minnesota. I mean, I remember night games against Northwestern. So that's why I'm curious more so top 10 teams, Ohio State notwithstanding, record against those top 10 teams.
Iowa played Ohio State. I just watched the end of this game. I didn't sit there and watch the end of the game. I kind of skimmed through it because it came up on my YouTube feed. It was those back-to-back huge games Ohio State and Iowa played in 09 and 10, or was it 08 and 09? I believe it was 09 and 10.
So 09 and 10. Yeah, they don't
one
play.
in Columbus that Ohio State won in overtime on a field goal. And the previous year, they won at Kinnick like 20-17. It was a really close game. They needed a last minute touchdown.
You've got them flip flopped, Mark. 2009 was in the horseshoe.
Okay.
2009 was in the horseshoe. And it was it Devin Barkley that made the final kick?
Yep.
In overtime, and that was a James Vandenberg led Iowa offense, because remember, it was a week prior that Ricky Stanzi blew out his leg and he was done.
There was a kickoff return touchdown that got Iowa back in the game in the fourth quarter.
It was dropped by DJK, and he scooped it back up and took it the distance. Yeah, a couple unbelievable catches by Marvin McNutt in that game as well. And James Vandenberg, I tell you, that dude, and I never know really how to feel about him looking back at his career, because, man, he went nuts in that game. And then, obviously 2011 to 2012, the program kind of took a nosedive. And part of that is you transitioned into the Greg Davis era, and just things got ugly. But, that 2009 game was memorable. And I even, it was crushing at the time, because Iowa was undefeated at the time. Well, I shouldn't say that. They were not undefeated. They'd lost to Northwestern. But you win that game, it was basically winner goes to the Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Winner would have been outright Big Ten champions. So that was, one of those moments in history that, as an Iowa fan, that I think back to. And then 2010, I think, was a Terrell Pryor game. It was not as close. That was in Kinnick.
No,
I don't think it was very close, was it?
Yeah, they needed close? Terrell Pryor to pull out a 4th and 10 scramble.
Okay, I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
2010 was just such a down year, because you know what else happened to tie? What's the Mark? You're here. We're just kind of meandering through the show right now. But if I want you to kind of take a periscope and try to figure out where Iowa fans, where their minds are about that 2010 season, what do you think is the most memorable thing about that 2010 season? Because for me, there's always one or two moments every single year that when I think of this season, I think of those one or two moments, or those one or two games. I could name that. We could do this for the last 15 years, but there's one specific moment in 2010 that Iowa fans, I think as a whole, I'd like to speak for a lot of Iowa fans who'd probably agree with this, would say that is the moment that stuck out that year.
We will do this very thing at some point this offseason. I will hit you with each season, and then you can respond with what stands out to you.
That'd be fun.
2010. So was that the team that played Missouri in a bowl game, or Oklahoma?
It was.
In the Cactus Bowl.
It was the Insight Bowl against Blaine Gabbert and Missouri. But no, that's not the moment that sticks out for me.
Well, I know, but I'm just trying to get my bearings on what season correct. That was.
The Micah Hyde pick six.
So would they go like 7-5 and lost a bowl game, went 7-6, something like that?
I believe they went 8-5.
Okay,
I believe.
Yeah, remember, there's a lot that to me is the Ohio State game, of course.
Oh, sure.
That Ohio State would not have won another Big Ten championship. They were riding 6 consecutive Big Ten championships at that point, and they needed that Iowa win, and they almost lost. Terrell Pryor had to scramble around on a 4th and 10 to convert, and then they scored. They almost, and this is the game that I watched the last few minutes of. It looked like they were going to blow the game because they had a wide open touchdown pass to DeVere Posey, and he dropped it in the end zone, and that set up the 4th and 10, and Pryor converted, and they won the game. And they tied for the Big Ten that year.
I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint.
Okay.
This is going to give it away, I think. The head coach of the team Iowa played that day is now the head coach of a different Big Ten institution.
Well, it's Brett Bielema, Wisconsin, and I'm trying to think what happened in that game. Obviously, they blew the game because Wisconsin tied Ohio State for the Big Ten championship that year. It was some kind of turnover. There was some kind of turnover.
No? Miserable moment. Complete breakdown. Penn State fakes a punt. Remember the fake punt in Kinnick? I don't even know what it was. I think they were on their own side of the field, and it was like 4th and 8. And Wisconsin fakes a punt. And I tell you, everybody at Iowa special teams unit had everybody fooled. I mean, I had no idea. And the punter just runs for whatever it was, 15, 20 yards. And it was just gut-wrenching. I mean, I just had no idea it was coming, and it was just ridiculous. But that is the moment. And I remember the final moment. It's weird how the mind works with sports, certain things. I remember the final minutes of that game, final moments of that game, and I was frantically trying to get downfield, and I just remember Stanzi dropped a pass off to Adam Robinson, who then failed to get out of bounds, and they were running back to the line, and of course, they didn't get back there in time, and that was the moment for me that year. It was like, because there was so much hype around that team. Let's not forget who they returned that year, Mark. DJK, Marvin McNutt, Ricky Stanzi, Adrian Claiborne was back on that team. That was a loaded team. Probably the most talented team of the Kirk Ferentz era. Probably the most talented. And, I mean, frankly, a huge disappointment to go 8-5. Massive disappointment. They were Cinderellas in 2009, the cardiac kids, as ESPN fondly called them. So that 2010 season was painful. 2016, we won't go through all the years. We can do this a different day, but 2016 very much parallels 2010 to me, because there was very similarly a lot of hype around that 16 team. In hindsight, I don't think it was anywhere close to, I shouldn't say anywhere close. I don't think it was as talented as 2010, but there was a lot of talent on that team, from George Kittle to CJ Beathard to Josie Jewell. I mean, go down the list. Desmond King was a part of that team in 2016. But the North Dakota State game, I was up at a hotel up in Okoboji watching that game. And, it was one of those things. I went fishing that morning, came back to the hotel, and expected to just be able to come back and watch a routine victory against an FCS team at home. And, it's one of those things, Mark, is every quarter that goes by and you're not, kind of like South Dakota State this past year, it's just like, oh my gosh, I didn't actually think this could happen, but it might happen. Mm-hmm. And North Dakota State pushed them around. I give them credit. I remember that was the first time we got a good look at Nate Stanley, because Beathard went down at one point. But, those 2 years, those are the moments that stand out for me.
Is that the only loss to an FCS team in Iowa history?
That's a great question. 2009, they should have lost to UNI if it hadn't been for 2 blocked field goals in the final 5 seconds of that game. They should have lost to Northern Iowa at home in 2009, ironically enough. But I want to say yes, because I don't know. I know they hadn't lost to North Dakota State prior. I'm just trying to think if they had lost 2014. You'd have to look this up, Mark. 2014, they played Northern Iowa really close. That was a David Johnson Northern Iowa team, and he ran all over Iowa in that game. And I don't remember. That's weird that I don't remember that. And Hawkeye Howard says, yes, we lost to Western Michigan. Western Michigan's FBS. We're talking just FCS teams. But yeah, look up 2014 Iowa UNI. I'm sure somebody will throw it up in the chat here. But I do remember David Johnson going wild in that one. And Iowa had linebacker issues. One of the few years they had linebacker issues.
Iowa won 31-23.
Okay. Yeah, that was a lot, way too close for comfort, though. What was David? Can you pull up David Johnson's stat line in that game?
Not on the site I was on.
I am curious because I've done this. I've looked these things up before when they come to mind. But
David Johnson, 5 catches, 203 yards.
5 catches, 203 yards. Very reminiscent to 2016 Christian McCaffrey type of stat line. Anyways, but yeah, we need to do that. We got time here over the next couple of months. We'll just reminisce, Mark, because you're such a college football savant that I certainly can't come anywhere close to touching you as it relates to the national landscape. But if we're just talking Iowa football for the last 15 years, 20 years.
I will enjoy you reminding me of a lot of things that I've forgotten and would not be able to recite by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but no, I think we got into this discussion because we were talking about the whiteout at Penn State. I'm just excited about that opportunity. It gives me more, I think it gives Iowa fans, it exceptional interest in what happens against West Virginia. Even though West Virginia's not expected to be great, Iowa gets Utah State week 1. That will be a game to follow. And it is a Saturday game, right? I'm not going crazy. It's not a Friday night game, correct?
The Iowa Penn State game?
No. Penn State, West Virginia, week 1. That's Saturday night, correct?
I believe it is September 3rd.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. September 3rd would be so. Yeah. Wait a minute. September 3rd.
It might be a Thursday night game.
September 3rd. How can that be? Are you sure it's not September 2nd?
Yeah, I could be wrong on the date. I'm just going from memory.
So, anyways, but yeah, it'll be a fun. It's always fun. Like Iowa. Here's what's always gets me, Mark, is Iowa Penn State. I even made a comment yesterday. There is sort of a rivalry between these two schools, and it's one of those weird rivalries that you don't know why it exists, but it just kind of does.
Well, they used to play every year.
They did, and they've just been a lot of very memorable finishes and very, very memorable games.
Oh, I'm sorry. You said Iowa Penn State rivalry.
Yeah.
Okay.
What'd you think I said?
I thought you said West Virginia Penn State. Yes, they used to have a rivalry.
That's a rivalry.
A long time ago.
No, that's
Iowa,
a well-known rivalry.
Yeah,
I'm talking Iowa Penn State. You think back to 2008 with the Daniel Murray kick in the final seconds of Sean Green year. 2009, they have the blocked punt. Adrian Claiborne returns it for a touchdown. I mentioned 2010 with the Sean Prater pick six. 2012, there's so much hype around that Iowa team. Or I shouldn't say around the Iowa team, but so much hype around that game. And they go in there, lose their two best offensive linemen. They're just done, and the season collapses around them. There were a couple years in there where, besides 2012, 2016 was a disaster. They came right back the next week and beat Michigan at home. But then you go to 2017, what a game that was. Saquon Barkley versus Josie Jewell, and Trace McSorley to Juwan Johnson in the final seconds to win that game. There was some controversy because Trace McSorley punted the ball after the clock hit 0, and just the expressions, like that game, the end of that game. I know everybody goes back to the Michigan State game, with the Sean McDonough call. Oh, he has trouble with the snap, that game. But if you go back to that 2017 Iowa Penn State game, and they pan around to some of the students as soon as the catch is made, and the look of complete disbelief, it is so surreal to watch it. And as an Iowa fan, it's like you look back and it's like, oh, that's painful. But it's also like, man, that's what makes this sport great. It really is. So that game, and then, of course, 2018, phenomenal game. I know it's ugly because it was rainy. Nate Stanley bummed up his thumb during that game. They had a chance late. Had they not thrown a pick six at the goal line, they may have won that game in large part because of Geno Smith's pick six, a guy who's from Pennsylvania. It's now playing out in Baltimore, ironically enough. But, and then 2019, you mentioned the night game that Iowa lost. Brandon Smith had an incredible over-the-back catch in that one. 2020 was the game they went into State College and won without a crowd there. And that was the Davion Nixon swim move on the pick six that everybody had social media up in arms. And then, of course, 2021, the top 5 showdown in Kinnick with the Nico Reganey catch from Petrus on the Gus Johnson call, and the Sean Clifford injury, and the fake injury claims, and the smelling of the rat from Kirk Ferentz. There's always drama with the game, and just always great finishes.
Yeah, it's been a great series. It really has. Listening to you and scrolling through and seeing the final scores is bringing back all those memories.
Yeah, we had Tom Kakert on from On 3 last week, and if you go back, I'm sure nobody's going to do this, but if you go back to my channel from 2 years, was it 2 years ago? Has my channel been around that long? Whatever it was, 2 years ago. It was two years ago. In fact, it may have been when we were trying to build this channel. But Tom and I actually did segments about each game, the Iowa Penn State rivalry from like the last 10 years. And it didn't get much traction view-wise, Mark. But it was fun to reminisce because we had similar takes on these games. It is a special series. I won't call it a rivalry because I'm sure Penn State fans would say we're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. But it's a great series. And it's maintained that level from the Joe Pa era to the O'Brien era, and then, of course, into the James Franklin era for different reasons.
Yeah, and it's been close. It has been close, and rarely has there been a blowout. You mentioned the 41-14 Penn State game, but besides that, games that have gone down to the wire.
What year was that?
Wasn't that
16.
2016?
But 2012 was also bad. 2012 was bad. I don't remember the final of that one, but that was not a good result.
Yeah, where was that 41-14 game? Anyway.
That's 26. I'm pretty sure that's 2016. I think you're correct on that.
Yes. 2012 was 38-14.
Yeah, another ugly game. So, but besides those two, you're right. It's been an incredibly fun series to watch. And a lot of incredible individual plays in all of those games. There's always one or two for both teams. I mean, what Saquon Barkley did in that 17 game. I mean, I'm assuming you watched that game from start to finish. It was the primetime game. What a game.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a great Iowa team. It was a team that finished 8-5, but it was a team that ended up beating Ohio State that year at home. So it was a very up and down, talented team. But man, that was such a battle to watch. I mean, there was a lot. Let's remember, there was a lot of talent on that Iowa team, even though they weren't a great Iowa team. That was Matt Nelson, who's a starting offensive tackle now in the league. You got Anthony Nelson, who's with the Bucks. It's Josie Jewell. Go down the list. Nate Stanley, of course. Nick Easley at wide receiver, who hasn't made an NFL career, but it was one of Iowa's last real solid slot receivers. So, yeah, it was just a fun series, and I'm expecting no less on the 23rd of September.
It was another Iowa defensive front with future NFL players on the edges that were long and lean and great. Epinesa. Yeah, that's who I was going to bring up. Just batting passes down, making it difficult for quarterbacks to throw downfield.
Well, when you have Matt Nelson on the inside, who's, like I say, now he's a right tackle for the Lions. You have Matt Nelson, who's like 6'8", and then Anthony Nelson, who's 6'8", lined up side by side. You're going to get your hands on some. In fact, there was a blocked field goal in that game by Anthony Nelson that ended up setting up one. And there was also an Akram Wadley. I know a lot of Iowa fans don't like Akram Wadley because of what's transpired in recent years, but Akram Wadley had a couple of heroic plays that year in that game specifically.
And that was classic Iowa with a game plan on defense against a very explosive team. And as you mentioned, one of the great players in college football, and getting completely annihilated statistically in the first half, but keeping it razor close.
Bend, don't break.
Yeah.
That's that is the when people use that term to explain what Phil Parker does. That game, you go back and look at the stat sheet of that game, and you'd think that Penn State won by 20. But that's how they get it done, and Phil Parker's a master at it.
Absolutely. When they have to be, the rest of the time they just shut people down.
Yeah, very true.
That shows up statistically that they're a top 5 defense because they don't allow much of anything. But in those cases, they know how to play it. Yeah.
And there are examples too of like last year against Ohio State where at some point, if you get absolutely no help from the offense, you just can't. I thought that defense, we've talked about this, that game in Columbus last year, I thought Iowa played unbelievable on defense and they gave up like 50.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate that the defense has to take that scoring margin to their.
I know. Isn't that sad?
That it has to be wielded against them in terms of their scoring average, 54 points. That's ridiculous.
It is.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Corey and I do this each and every Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time. So we hope that you will join us and bring some folks in with you. We love the college football conversation. Of course, it leads with Iowa. We're focused on Iowa each and every week, but we have all sorts of Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and I'm sure other fans that drop by each and every week. So this is a college football show for everyone. Well, we did have a couple topics that we can certainly save for future weeks, and they are not time pressing. So is there anything else we needed to hit this week?
Not that I can think of. I'll put a plug in for my channel briefly. We've got Evan Bronze, new Iowa basketball forward, Evan Bronze, who's transferring in from Belmont. Got him coming on the show. Should probably be released either tomorrow or Thursday. So that'll be fun. And yeah, more content on the channel. But yeah, we got a couple of months now, Mark. We're gonna have to. We've got plenty of different things we can debate. We've kind of spurred up some ideas here on the air.
Yes, we have. Would it not be fun to review Kirk Ferentz's greatest victories and most excruciating losses?
We could do that. Yeah. We absolutely could do that.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. And as you see on the banner, from the Hawkeye of the Storm is the place to be for Iowa athletics coverage, men's and women's basketball, of course, football, with Corey again from the Hawkeye of the Storm. All right, Corey, we appreciate it.
Sounds good, Mark. We'll talk next week.